Chapter 1.9 Pattern and Rhythm Part 1. So we've talked about this a little bit or around it when we talked about variety and unity, but we're going to get into more detail with patterns and rhythm in artworks. So pattern and rhythm can bring order and create a dynamic experience of time. Patterns are created by the recurrence of an art element, and rhythm arises through the repetition of the pattern. So repetition is really kind of what makes a pattern, and we're going to look at some examples. Alternating patterns are also used, and the area covered by a pattern is called a field. So when we are talking about field, it's not the whole thing at one time. Sometimes it is, but in this particular case, this black rectangle, white rectangle, black, so on. The field is the background, and then the pattern is the element, the design that is repeated. So we have a geometric shape that repeats here, and that is what is giving us a pattern. This is an alternating pattern, okay, because it's black and white. So, unity and contrast. When we look at this piece by Suzanne Valadon, it's a very famous piece, The Blue Room. It's kind of interesting because when we looked at our scale and proportion, it's kind of that rule of thirds if you think about it. She's in the middle third, then there's these other two segments, the bottom and the top. We have a recurring pattern here with this sort of leaf or floral motif on blue, and then we have her striped pajamas creating some contrast there. Okay, then we have another pattern going on behind her, but we have a lot of this blue pattern creating unity here, but there's also like a really good contrast that makes our attention come to her clothing and her body. So organic leaf pattern, right? Green and white striped geometric pattern, and then a modeled pattern in the background. So it energizes the work, if that makes sense. So when we're looking at all these vibrating different patterns, our eye is traveling a lot. And when your eye travels, that's the whole idea with this idea of unity and variety. Variety is getting you to look around the work, and that is what an artist wants you to do, to look at the whole work and using different things, in this case, pattern. All right, we looked at the album quilt before in unity and variety. And we do have a pattern that repeats here. And we also have this border too. That's kind of an interesting thing. If you look at that as well, we didn't really talk about that, but that repeats. So it's a motif is a unit, and I use that back here. This leaf design, that's a motif that repeats. So a motif is an element that repeats, like a pattern, a unit, I should call it, instead of an element. It's confusing. So a unit, a part of a pattern. The motifs can represent ideas, images, and themes, and a repeated motif can create a strong, unified design. So when we look at this piece, we do have a number of motifs. We have this sort of teardrop pointed shape here. We have a sort of a scrolling leaf pattern happening here. And we have another one here. It's a little bit hard to see. Another organic scrolling leaf pattern here. And then we have a repeat of this flower, or sorry, it has like two flowers on a stem, and these little tiny florets, okay? So it's repeating a motif. In Islamic work, and we'll get into this a little bit later, it doesn't show images of God or images of people very often. Mostly it's about pattern and motifs and design. And there's geometric pattern. You even see script as well, but you're going to see flowers and plants quite frequently in Islamic culture because it's a desert culture, a lot of it. So they really revere flowers and growing things and water. Okay, so birds in the air. This is a block quilt pattern. This is called birds in the air. Now, the idea here is that they're trying to choose something that makes a sense, sorry, makes sense within the quilt in terms of content and meaning. And this is about abolitionists and the end of slavery. So this is interesting because previous to this reading this book, I wasn't aware of this body of work and this social political sense with quilts. Like somebody's selling these to promote the freeing of slaves, and that's really, really wild. To think about 1840, 1850. To be making a political sort of a fundraiser type of an item in the art world to promote the end of slavery. So that's really fantastic, but it's interesting. I hadn't heard about this. On the back side or in the details of the, it doesn't tell us exactly where this is, but in a detail you see "Deliver me from the oppression of man." So there's a slave and within the bird design, and we see it, birds of the air design, and we see this in there, so you know that is why you're buying this quilt. So it kind of goes with the idea of freedom, the birds in the air pattern, and they were sold to raise awareness and funding to free slaves. I just think that's amazing. It's fantastic. Okay, we're going to get into another one, our Maya lintel, showing the shield of the jaguar, shield, jaguar, and lady Zoc or Hawk. She is down here with her rope or thread going through her tongue with thorns on it. This is not to scale, let's hope anyway, but she's doing a blood sacrifice showing that she honors the gods, so she's pulling this through her tongue to pierce it and to create, some blood flow to show that she's sacrificing. But on what we're looking at is this repeated these images right here, these little squares, and those are really interesting because they're glyphs and they tell us a lot of information about the culture and who's in the portrait here and the Maya system, the system of writing. Luckily, we've sort of pulled this apart. We know what these glyphs mean. But anyway, we have pattern here. We also have, it's a little bit subtle because this lighting on this piece isn't great, but you can kind of see there's like a clothing pattern on there. Hers is going diagonally. His is a little bit more squared up. There's also patterns with the jewelry on the bracelets and necklaces on Lady Zoc. So we have quite a bit of patterning on here. So it's emphasized to show the royal power and hierarchy because we would have a meaning that would go with those patterns.